talking about space, about how we know more about space than we do about the ocean. Those underwater listening devices were most likely so that they could hear UFOs moving around. Have you ever seen those structures that they found under the ocean outside of Japan?
No.
Fascinating. It looks like some ancient structure that was under the ocean a long time ago. Look at that. There's corridors and steps. They have no idea. Now, this is scary. Flight 19 was a group of flights taken by Navy SEALs in the 1940s. Once the flight reached the North Atlantic Ocean, one of the pilots stated that it looks like we have entered white waters. We are truly lost. This area is known as the Bermuda Triangle.
Well, this thing looks creepy. Earlier this year, a team of researchers from China set out on an expedition to the northwestern Pacific Ocean to explore the depths around the Caroline Plate, an area off the coast of the Philippines. They weren't diving themselves, but instead used an underwater robot to explore the area and collect tiny creatures from the ocean floor. And when the robot pulled up a sample from a seamount, among the tiny critters they found was a pregnant amphipod, a type of shrimp-like creature that's just a few millimeters long. But this wasn't like any amphipod they'd ever seen. This was a brand new species, now been dubbed Eerie carolinus. It's an interesting but again very creepy looking creature. Good thing it's so small. The eyes in particular were noted as being large and very well pigmented, which helped it stand out among the other species that live in these deep waters. And here's the really interesting part. When the researchers looked inside its body, they found 9 baby amphipods growing inside her. This footage here was captured in 2015, a never-before-seen species of squid. So a group of researchers from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research Kiel, and the University of South Florida teamed up for an expedition in the Gulf of California off Mexico's west coast. Using a remotely operated vehicle, the team was able to dive as deep as 8,000 feet without ever leaving the surface and without disturbing the creature's environment. The team managed to capture a large squid on camera, but soon they noticed something strange about this one. The squid was carrying dozens of giant eggs, around 30 to 40 of them, each about half an inch across. Now, squids of the species they thought this mother was, called gonatids, usually carry eggs that are only about a fifth of an inch in diameter, so these were much bigger. They'd never seen eggs this large in any gonatid squid before, and there's no other squid known to carry eggs of this size. So the researchers figured there was a very good chance they'd discovered a brand new species altogether. Pictured here is a brand new species of fish found in Africa. Earlier this year in Zambia, a strange creature was spotted swimming through a river, heading straight for a bridge. Scientists pulled the creature from the water, at first having no idea what they just found, while it turned out they discovered a brand new species. The team had been in the middle of a project studying a group of fish called nanocharax, more commonly known as darters. They were looking at preserved specimens collected from rivers in South Africa when something odd started to stand out. The fish from a few specific rivers, mostly caught in 2005, had a distinct pattern that was different from the usual darters they were used to. These fish had a unique scale pattern and a banded coloring that immediately caught the researchers' attention. And after further investigation, they realized that they'd uncovered a completely new species dubbed Nanocharax skeltoni, or Skelton's darter fish. They decided to name the species after Paul Harvey Skelton, a renowned professor at the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. A study came out this past April about a brand new species of jellyfish discovered off the coast of Florida, pictured here. Peter Schuchert and Richard Collins carried out 91 nighttime scuba dives near Palm Beach over the course of years, and they found some pretty cool stuff, like, just some never before seen jellyfish, for example. After photographing the creatures and capturing 2 of them, they took a closer look and realized they'd found a new species which was soon dubbed Zancleopsis grandis, or the large Zancleopsis jellyfish. These things are just over an inch tall with tentacles stretching more than 2 inches in length. The body itself has a long, narrow shape that shifts as the jellyfish moves through the water. The researchers named it grandis because of the relatively large size and the big bulbs on its tentacles. And just like other jellyfish, Zancleopsis grandis uses jet propulsion to move. It sucks in water and then squirts it back out through a small opening, propelling itself forward through the water. Kind of crazy that these new things were found in Florida. As Collins put it, part of the work we are doing is to demonstrate and document the amazing oceanic biodiversity here in Florida. Florida waters are well studied relative to most of the world's oceans, and yet there is still so much to learn and discover. And yeah, that is crazy because Florida, right? And then you got all this vast water over so much of the earth. Like, who knows what crazy stuff could be out there. Now, this is the first and only piece of footage ever captured of a living genus of squid called this. Just earlier this year, the Schmidt Ocean Institute led a team of oceanographers on an expedition to some of the remotest parts of the southeastern Pacific Ocean. During their month-long mission, they came across 20 never-before-seen species and another 80 that were observed in this part of the ocean for the first time. These squids have only ever been seen on the surface, i.e. they've been brought up in nets, dead. We've never seen one alive swimming around in its natural habitat, so this was pretty amazing to see. And there haven't even been that many specimens of these creatures either. It's such a rare genus that we've only had like a few specimens, and a lot of them came from the late 1800s. Sea cucumbers don't really sound all that scary, but I mean, just look at this one. This is what's called a brown-ringed sea cucumber, and it was just discovered. Scientists on a submarine were exploring the South China Sea when they spotted this small, reddish sea creature. It didn't quite look like anything they'd seen before, and as it turns out, it wasn't anything they'd seen before. It was found during a series of dives between 2018 and 2023, using a manned submersible. When the team surfaced and had a chance to study the creature, which had something like 20 tentacles and over 70 tube feet, they realized that they'd uncovered a new animal and gave it this crazy name that, again, I can't even begin to pronounce. AKA the brown-ringed sea cucumber, though. This new species of sea cucumber can grow to about 8 inches long and around 2 inches wide, and this wasn't all they found either. Yan Lu Zhao and Haibin Zhang, part of the research team, also discovered 2 more new species of sea cucumber on the same expedition. Next up, we have another story that came out this past April about a new creature discovered off the southern tip of China. Just what is this thing? An ancient wood carving? Well, no, it's actually the shell of a living animal. A research team from China was exploring a deep sea area called the Haima Cold Seep off the coast of Hainan Island when their underwater robot picked up something from the sea floor. It was a shell, and at first the researchers didn't really think much of it, but once they took a closer look, they were like, well, actually, what exactly is this thing? The shell belonged to a type of mollusk known for living in extreme environments, like cold seeps. These are special areas on the seafloor where chemicals like methane and hydrogen sulfide leak up from the Earth's crust, creating this chemically rich water that only very specific life forms can survive in. This weird shell was just over 4 inches long and had a, quote, robust and rectangular shape. The mollusk's foot, the part that sticks out from the shell when it wants to move around, was described as large with an oval sole. But it was really the shape of the shell that made this thing so unique. It's the fact that it's rectangular. Other species shells are usually curved inward on the ends. Just look at how gorgeous this snail is. On the coastlines of Japan, a tiny new species of sea creature has been found. Hiroshi Fukuda, a researcher and associate professor at Okayama University, first came across these rare snails over 30 years ago when he was still a student. They were actually relatively well known in Japan, but had never been formally documented until last year. Fukuda studied dozens of these snails and ended up naming them this. And luckily, it has a much easier to pronounce nickname, the strange dwarf snail. These snails are tiny, measuring less than 1/10 of an inch long, and Fukuda described these snails as bizarre. These things are small, but they move around quickly, crawling in step-like movements. Fukuda wrote in his paper that they're usually found crawling on muddy walls of earthworm and crab burrows, which might be why they were overlooked for such a long time. This strange-looking animal was discovered in an underwater cave. A team of researchers recently discovered a brand new species of hermit crab in a dark underwater cave in Japan, about 100 feet from the entrance. The 3-person team found this tiny critter in just about 3 feet of water. After carefully examining the male specimen, they realized they had come across a new species. This is its name, also called this. Not even the alternate name is easy to say. This new species is incredibly small though, measuring less than 1 centimeter long. Aw, that's cute. What really set it apart from other hermit crabs were its claws. They were described as strongly unequal and dissimilar. The right claw is moderately slender, the left claw is much smaller, only about half the size of the right one. And this last thing looks like it just hurts. There's like little spines and spikes on it. In March of 2021, researchers took a deep dive into the South China Sea using a manned submersible. During one of their dives, they came across a large crab sitting on some coral. They captured the creature and brought it back to study. Until then, this was a never-before documented species, which was later dubbed Gordonopsis mazupo. Finally, a scientific name that I can actually get my lips around. But they're also known as Mazu's porter crab. This new species is considered pretty big for a crab. Its body is about 1.2 inches long, with legs stretching more than 3.5 inches. When you include its legs, the crab measures over 8 inches across in total. Its claws are especially interesting, described as blade-like. The researchers named it Gordonopsis mazupo after Mazu, the Chinese goddess or grandmother of the sea. And so far, only one of these things has ever been found.
First, healthy great whites. When we think of animals being washed ashore, we often think of old and sick fish that can't resist the tide, or fish that get caught in a storm. In general, they have something wrong with them. But on October 5th of 2023, a large 14-foot great white was seen struggling and thrashing in Cape Breton waters before being stranded. This was the most recent in a disturbing string of seemingly healthy great whites washing up on Canadian shores. Even after an extensive autopsy and investigation, no reason was found for a large and apparently healthy shark to be stranded like this. Some have raised concerns, as in 2022 there was only one great white that washed up, whereas in 2023 there were more than 5. This sort of uptick in strandings is not normal or natural, and has caused many environmentalists some serious concern. How and why was this shark washed up? It had injuries, but they were all old and healed. It was well fed, it didn't have any trauma, and passed all disease tests. The mystery is still out there. Next is the whale fall. On the 16th of July 2023, something gut-wrenching happened. Beachgoers were shocked, and local officials and rescue workers went into overdrive when 55 pilot whales washed up on the Isle of Lewis. The entire pod had beached itself and had already suffered heavily. It was determined that one mother had a very difficult birth, which led to her being washed ashore and stranded. But pilot whales are deeply social animals and do not abandon one another. It's believed the rest of the pod either intentionally beached themselves or were staying close in shallow water and were accidentally beached. 15 whales were alive when rescue workers and medics arrived, but due to the excessive amount of trauma, only one could be successfully saved and returned to the water, making this one of the single largest mass whale death events in history.
We normally see a single whale, the occasional, very occasional group of a small number, but this is certainly my biggest number I've ever seen in a single stranding.
Next is the globster monster. Recently, a massive lump of decaying flesh washed up in Papua New Guinea, and no one knows what it is. These gelatinous masses of decaying matter do wash up every now and again and are known as globsters, being essentially impossible to identify or recognize. This particular one happened to look quite a bit like a mermaid, which raised a lot of excitement, despite the fact it is almost certainly some sort of whale, seal, dugong, or other marine mammal. Indeed, researchers were able to narrow the lobster's identity down to being a marine mammal at least, but beyond that, no one can really tell. Apparently, no one wanted to go through DNA testing of this putrid mass, and instead, it was simply buried by the locals. Next is the lance on shore. The long-nosed lancetfish is one of the larger deep-sea predatory fish and can dwell down to 6,000 feet in depth. They have a long dorsal sail and gelatinous muscles, yet are successful predators in the deep. Yet, for some reason, one which no one knows, lancetfish keep washing up on the Oregon coast. It's not a ton of them, and it's not very frequent, but it has been happening consistently for decades or even longer, and yet still, no one knows why. There are theories to be sure, but none are exactly sufficient. Some say these lancetfish are old and weak and simply get slowly washed into shore, unable to fight the current any longer. Others think it may be due to storms that wash them ashore, and yet others say it's actually caused by cold shocks, channels of very cold water that fish may get into, causing immediate shock. Still, nothing has been proven, and the lancetfish mystery continues.
Lancetfish are quite common and sometimes caught more frequently in the waters of Hawaii than even tuna and swordfish.
Next is the deep sea football.
It's called a Pacific football fish, and it's very rare that you actually get to see one, but a beachgoer in Southern California made this discovery.
The Pacific football fish, so named because it looks like a soccer or football, is a species of deep-sea anglerfish and is one of the best ambushers in the wild. They hide in the pitch black of the deep sea and use an adapted bioluminescent spine as a lure, drawing prey into ranges for their mouth to snatch out and grab. These fish dwell at a depth of some 2,000 to 3,000 feet, completely isolated from the light. So how then did the fish wind up 3,000 feet out of its home? How did it wind up on Laguna Beach in California? In truth, no one really knows, but there are a lot of theories, from a storm that churned up the deep sea water, or a cold shock that ended this fish, or even a deep sea disease. Who knows the real reason, but it seems that every once in a while, Crystal Cove, California gets a deep sea fleshy beach surprise. Next is the megamouth. The megamouth shark is a very large deep sea shark, and yet is the smallest of the filter feeders. It uses its fine interlocking teeth as a sieve, and its titular big mouth helps it gulp up large amounts of water and prey. Because they're such deep sea creatures, we know very little about them and only have a few studyable specimens. This 18-foot long shark washed up in the Philippines completely stunning scientists. It was pregnant with 7 pups. This was a massive discovery, as it not only tells us the potential average litter size, but also that megamouths give birth to live young, as opposed to some species that lay eggs. This is the first of many steps towards gaining a better understanding of these huge and strange deep sea creatures. Oh, and because, of course, nothing can ever be easy with science, no one knows why this shark was washed ashore. Next is the white whale. The white whale seems to have gotten tired of running from Captain Ahab and decided to spare him the satisfaction and beached itself. Of course, this isn't a vicious and combative sperm whale like in the book, it's instead a humpback, but it is still, obviously, a very big white whale. However, it didn't quite have albinism, as it did have spots of darker coloration on its skin. Researchers believe it had leucism, a genetic condition similar to albinism, but which doesn't quite affect all the pigment cells. It's unknown why this juvenile female humpback washed up on shore, and whether it had anything to do with its white skin or not, as many animals with albinism or leucism are often at greater threat from predators. And finally, the penguin apocalypse. The fairy penguins of Australia and New Zealand are an absolutely adorable species that live in small dens in protected sections of beach. Each penguin only grows to a foot tall maximum, and they spend all day in the water hunting before returning home for nightfall. But these penguins didn't return. In fact, a lot of them didn't. Multiple times, entire communities of penguins have washed up deceased at the same time. It's unknown what's causing this mass dying of fairy penguins, but as someone who has seen these little penguins return from the water and waddle to their nests, it truly hurts my heart to think of so many of these little penguins washing up at once. Those were the creepiest sea creatures that washed up on shore.
The barrel-eye fish is a very unique but somewhat eerie looking creature found in the Mariana Trench. Its nickname is the spookfish, and you can probably see why. At first glance, it kind of looks like its eyes are on the front, but they aren't. It has a transparent head, and through this transparent head you can see this pair of glowing orbs. Those are actually its eyes. This may be one of the most unique looking animals I've ever seen, certainly the strangest looking fish. The barrel eye is a deep sea dweller living in the dark depths where sunlight barely reaches, like the Mariana Trench. And they have see-through heads. Inside their heads are big tubular eyes that point upward, not something you see every day. If that's not weird enough though, those eyes can actually rotate. So if the barrel-eye fish wants to check something out above it, it can swivel its eyes up. They usually do this to catch prey drifting down from above. Now, as for the rest of their body, it's pretty streamlined. They're not exactly speed demons, but they've got a sleek design for life in the deep sea. These fish were first discovered in 1939, but they were hard to study because they live so deep under the water, their bodies would actually collapse because of the change in pressure when they were brought up to the surface. But now that we have remotely controlled deep sea vehicles, they've become a lot easier to observe. There are a lot of large animals lurking in the Mariana Trench, and this is because of a phenomenon known as abyssal gigantism. This is where creatures living way down in the deep sea, like the Mariana Trench, grow way bigger than their counterparts up near the surface. One example is the giant amphipods that have been discovered down there. If you don't know what amphipods are, they look kind of shrimp-like, but these giant ones can hit a whopping 13 inches in length, which is massive compared to the shallower water versions. And some other deep sea dwellers down in the trenches, like certain types of jellyfish and squid, also follow this trend of growing way larger than their counterparts near the surface. As to why creatures can get so big in the trench, some theories are that it's because of the extreme conditions down there. The pressure at the bottom of the ocean is insane, and the cold and dark environment might be making the creatures evolve to become giants, a way of adapting to the tough life in the deep sea by becoming supersized. The telescope octopus is a ghostly looking animal. It's pretty much entirely translucent, aside from its eyes, which are strangely tubular. They protrude out of its body almost like telescopes. This allows for wider peripheral vision so it can avoid predators and locate prey. Even cooler though, the telescope octopus has this nifty trick where it can almost disappear. If it feels threatened or just wants to be sneaky, it can wrap its arms around its body, turning it into this smooth, gelatinous blob type thing, blending into the dark background of the deep sea. Even though they have this ghostly translucent look where you can see the insides of their heads, there's something beautiful about these creatures and the way they just peacefully glide through the water. It's mesmerizing. Next we have the Oceanic, which is a pretty cool creature but kinda nasty at the same time. On top of that, they look like something from another planet. They have a few nicknames: bone worms, zombie worms, and bone-eating worms. Pretty ominous by the sounds of it, but these guys are basically underwater recyclers. These worms have adapted to bore into the skeletons of dead animals, particularly whale carcasses, to access the fatty lipids locked inside. They were first discovered at a depth of 10,000 feet. They've evolved to thrive in the extreme conditions of the sea floor. Their main source of food is the remains of dead whales and other animal carcasses that sink to the ocean floor. The success of zombie worms relies on teamwork, with the females taking on the majority of tasks. Using acidic secretions, they drill into the bones of dead animals, freeing up all those valuable lipids. This involves a symbiotic relationship with bacteria as well that aid in the digestion and processing of these released lipids. This allows the zombie worms to make a living in the deep sea environment where food sources are pretty scarce. Next on the list we have the goblin shark. These have to be the most horrific looking sharks in existence, right? I mean, goblin sharks, it's really just a perfect name for them. Just look at that. I'm like, yeah, that's a water goblin. They have elongated, flattened snouts, almost like they have swords sticking out of their faces. They have a pinkish white coloration, and their skin is actually kind of translucent. You can almost see their blood vessels underneath. Combine this with their long, sharp teeth that just jut out at odd angles, and you've got a face that only their mother could love, and even that's a bit of a stretch. Goblin sharks also have the ability to thrust their jaws forward to snatch their prey, almost like the xenomorph in Alien. Take a look at this. The anglerfish. These are those super deep sea fish with the bioluminescent lures that hang in front of their mouths. In the Mariana Trench, various species of anglerfish have been found, and they're all pretty unsettling to look at. One of the strangest parts about certain species of anglerfish, though, is how they mate. Males are significantly smaller than females, and often have a completely different role in the reproductive process. When a male finds a female, he latches onto her body and eventually fuses with her, becoming this permanent reproductive partner. This allows the female to have a readily available mate, and this is very important because encounters with other anglerfish are rare. The deep sea environment they live in is just so sparse, so they gotta take what they can get. But let's talk about those jaws. They're huge, allowing them to consume prey much larger than themselves. Their jaws can also extend, and their stomachs can stretch, allowing them to engulf prey whole. And to top it off, anglerfish are known as ambush predators. Many of them are dark, helping them blend into the abyss and avoid being seen by prey and other predators. Next up, we have the vampire squid. These are really cool looking creatures. I think they may be my favorite type of squid, even though they're not actually squids. I'll get to that a bit later though. Anyway, pretty clear how these things got their name. It looks like it's wearing your classic Halloween-y vampire type cape. Batman squid would have also been a good nickname for these things. Like I said, despite their name, these things are actually not true squids. They're more closely related to octopus, and they belong to a distinct order of cephalopods called Vampiromorphidae. And they're the only living species found in this group. All the other creatures that were once in it are now extinct. The vampire squid has a gelatinous body covered in photophores, which can emit bioluminescent light. It also has webbing between its arms, which creates that kind of cloak-like appearance. This allows the squid to control its buoyancy. The coolest thing about vampire squids, though, are their defense mechanisms. They can turn themselves inside out, covering their bodies with spines, and this helps frighten off predators. Next on the list is the fang-toothed fish. You can clearly see how this thing got its name. This thing is horrifying. It's small, only reaching about 6 inches, but it has that fearsome set of jaws and a pair of dead white eyes, making for a pretty intimidating little creature. I'm sure it still wouldn't be fun being bit by one of these things. They're almost like zombie fish a little bit, the way their eyes look. Plus, those teeth are so large that the fangtooth can't actually close its mouth completely. They're disproportionately large compared to their body. Their dark coloration, usually a deep brown or black, allows them to blend into the darkness of the deep sea as well, making it easier, of course, for them to ambush their prey. As scary as they look, though, they're mostly feeding on smaller fish and zooplankton. An interesting thing about the fangtooth are their unique swim bladders. Unlike many fish, which rely on their swim bladders for buoyancy, fangtooths have a reduced swim bladder, which helps them remain stable in the extreme pressures of the deep sea. This next one is actually pretty cool. Plastic-eating microbes. There are some really strange microbes living deep within the trench. Scientists have found some microbes able to survive deep in an environment with intense pressure and just pitch black darkness. One pretty remarkable discovery among these mysterious microbes is a type that actually has the ability to consume plastic. As wild as this is, it's actually a good thing because plastic pollution has become a pretty big environmental concern. Finding microbes that can break down plastic is kind of a good sign. It could potentially assist in reducing plastic waste in the ocean. Mariana Trench, reaching depths of over 36,000 feet, makes for pretty extreme challenges for life. The pressure at those depths is intense, equivalent to about 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. This goes to show how adaptable life can be in the most extreme environments. Finally, though, we have the deep sea dragonfish. This is a group of bioluminescent fish that lurk deep in the Mariana Trench, and what a horrifying looking creature it is. This thing looks like, you know that hallway monster in Hellraiser that like runs along the wall? Reminds me of that. These guys have long fang-like teeth and elongated bodies, incredibly menacing, sort of like a piranha and a serpent fused together. These ones are also, again, bioluminescent, producing light through chemical reactions in their bodies. They use this bioluminescence not just to navigate the darkness of the depths, but to lure prey and communicate with each other. The light can be emitted from various parts of their bodies, helping them to camouflage against the faint light from above, making it easier to surprise unsuspecting fish. They also have an excellent sense of smell, which allows them to detect food from a distance. Once they identify their prey, they strike quickly, using their sharp teeth to capture and consume. This does not look like something from this planet. That is one creepy looking creature. Not only does it have this incredibly strange looking head, but the length of those tentacles, it just doesn't look real. But it is. Now, this video was taken at a drilling site in the Gulf of Mexico, but these squids are found all through the warm tropical waters of the Atlantic Ocean, including areas around the Bermuda Triangle. I probably don't need to say this after the clip you just saw, but these things' tentacles get incredibly long, around 4 to 8 meters or 13 to 26 feet. These are the only squids known to live in the Hadal Zone, the deepest region of the ocean, but it makes sense. They definitely do fit in with all the other strange, alien-looking life that lurks down there. What you're seeing here is a fish trying to avoid the deadly tentacles of a Portuguese man-o-war. They're really cool looking creatures, but their stings are powerful enough to kill some fish and in rare cases even humans. If their venom travels to the lymph nodes, it can cause airway blockage, shortness of breath, cardiac issues, and again in extreme cases even death. In every case though, their stings are incredibly painful. Anything that gets that guttural, almost animalistic scream out of you, that's gotta be incredibly painful. This video was posted to the channel Aqua di Leo, who'd been spearfishing with a friend when a wave pushed a Portuguese man-o-war right over his head. He went on to write in the description, "I didn't even see it, but immediately felt the tentacles on my neck and it sent me into a world of pain. As soon as I lifted my head out of the water, I felt it push up against my lips and cheeks, and the tentacles latched onto my mask and neck." He finished off with a pretty important word of advice: never dive alone. Great whites may be terrifying, but have you ever heard of the megamouth shark? Definitely sounds pretty ominous. This is some rare footage of one. Now, it may not look all that scary here, but how about this image? There we go, that's more terrifying. Just imagine if that thing was alive. These are very elusive sharks. In fact, they were only discovered in 1976. Not only can they get really big, up to 18 feet or about 5.5 meters long, but as you can probably tell, they're very odd looking and have one of the largest mouths in the animal kingdom. Huge, wide, and lined with hundreds of tiny teeth designed for filtering plankton from the water. Now, unlike most sharks that are sleek, fast hunters, the megamouth moves slowly and feeds by swimming through the water with its open mouth, so it may not be the most threatening of sharks in practice, but they do look pretty terrifying, and I'm still sure you wouldn't want to get in one's way. A much more dangerous shark though is the oceanic white tip. There's no escaping these guys. They're found all over the ocean, including the Bermuda Triangle, but they don't go very far north or south, preferring warmer waters, and they can be very aggressive. They aren't very picky about what they eat either. They're scavenging, opportunistic feeders, and if you're ever stranded out in the middle of the ocean, you'll probably be dealing with these things if you're out there long enough. Oceanic white tips have been responsible for tons of attacks during shipwrecks and plane crashes, especially when injured survivors are leaking out their BLOOD into the water. They just love that. It's not that they prefer humans over anything else, they just go for whatever's most vulnerable and easy to catch. So if a plane crashes or a ship sinks, the shark may not hesitate to swim in and check out the scene, circling the area before picking off the survivors. Imagine, if you will, that you're flying over the ocean on your way to Florida or Puerto Rico, anywhere around the Bermuda Triangle. It's been a peaceful flight. In fact, you're almost nodding off as you stare down at the ocean below. But then you spot something a little strange. A shadow is looming in the water, and it's getting bigger and bigger. It starts creating ripples, which get more and more violent. People around you are starting to notice now. Passengers are even starting to audibly panic, and before you can even react, a colossal figure leaps out of the water, its enormous jaws snapping open, and to your horror, your tranquil window view is soon enveloped by this ginormous beast's gaping maw. And then that's it. You and everyone else in the plane just gone, dragged into the depths of the ocean down below. You've been what I'm going to call Bermuda beasted. We all know what makes the Bermuda Triangle so intriguing are all the ships and planes that have gone missing while flying or sailing through it. There are tons of theories as to what could be happening, and one of them is that there's this massive undiscovered monster gobbling up boats and aircraft dubbed the Bermuda Beast. While sailing the waters of the Bermuda Triangle, you may just hear the eerie high-pitched calls of a rare and endangered bird called the Bermuda petrel, also known as the cacao. Now, as you can see, this is a pretty adorable animal, but aside from being cute, there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about with these things. First of all, these are endangered birds, so endangered that for years it was thought to actually be extinct, until it was rediscovered in 1951, nesting on a tiny remote island in the Bermuda Triangle. And then there's the cacao haunting, high-pitched calls that echo over the water. To some, they sound almost ghostly as they reverberate. Their white feathers also give them a bit of a ghost-like appearance as they soar through the air. For this reason, they're sometimes referred to as the ghost bird. Frilled sharks are what are known as living fossils. It's one of the creepiest, most ancient-looking creatures to ever lurk in the deep. These things have long eel-like bodies and sharp needle-like teeth arranged in rows. It's been around for millions of years, and its appearance has barely changed since the time of the dinosaurs. This is why they're known as living fossils. And when you see one, it's easy to understand why it looks like it could have been designed to haunt the darkest corners of the ocean. With its long, tooth-filled mouth, a frilled shark can grab onto prey with this eerie, snake-like motion. It's not a fast swimmer really, but it lurks in the deep and then ambushes fish and squid. Scorpion fish can be found throughout the Indo-Pacific. This is actually a family of fish containing many different species, like the stonefish and lionfish. First off, let's talk about the stonefish. This one is a real nightmare if you're walking around barefoot in the shallow water. These fish are masters of camouflage. They look like, nothing more than a rock or a pile of seaweed, blending perfectly with the ocean floor, but if you accidentally step on one, you're in trouble. The spines on its back inject potent venom that can cause excruciating pain and even paralyze you. In some cases, it can be deadly if you're not treated quickly enough. Then there's the lionfish, which is a pretty cool looking animal, terrifying in its own way though, and it's even worse if you get near it. This fish has long spiny fins that look like razor sharp daggers protruding out of their bodies. It's not really an aggressive fish, but if you get too close, again, its spines can inject a painful venom. Look how strange this creature looks when it eats. This is a goblin shark, pretty apt name. Goblin sharks have these long, flattened snouts that look, to put it bluntly, pretty ugly. The other cool thing about them though is that, as you just saw, their skin is almost translucent. But the real horror comes from its extendable jaw. The goblin shark's jaw can literally shoot forward to snatch prey like some freaky mechanical contraption, grabbing onto whatever fish or squid it's after. Pretty disturbing stuff. Now, luckily these are deep sea dwellers, typically found in waters between 200 and 1200 feet deep, so it's not something you're likely gonna bump into while snorkeling. Now, we talked about the creepy looking big fin squid at the top of the video, so seems fitting to close out with another type of squid, the giant squid. A seldom seen creature lurking in the depths of the ocean, once thought of as a mythical creature. The giant squid is one of the most incredible creatures ever discovered. It can grow up to 40 feet long, possibly even bigger, making it one of the largest invertebrates on Earth. Tentacles that could wrap around your boat like a snake, massive suction cups that could hold on to anything that gets too close. Basically, they're the real-life versions of the kraken. These creatures rarely come up to the surface though, only venturing into shallower waters occasionally, so they're not the easiest animal to study, which is why they were placed in the realm of myth and legend for such a long time. For centuries, sailors and fishermen would tell tales of sea monsters, stories of enormous tentacled beasts dragging ships under the waves, and it's very possible that at least some of these stories were based on real encounters with the giant squid. Well, this is exciting. This news just came out the other day. In the waters off the Solomon Islands, there is a sea creature so massive it could be seen from space. In fact, it's one of the largest living organisms on Earth, a colossal coral colony. Discovered by a team of researchers and filmmakers, this coral is roughly the size of 2 basketball courts. Unlike most coral reefs, which are made up of different colonies, this one is an individual organism made up of millions of tiny animals called polyps. The species is Pavona clavus, and its size and slow growth suggests it's been around for centuries. Underwater photographer Manu Sanfelix, who first saw it last month, was in awe, saying, quote, "It's a dream to see something unique like this. When Napoleon was alive, this thing was here," end quote. Before this discovery, the largest known coral was in American Samoa, measuring about 22 meters wide, but as marine conservation expert Stacy Jupiter points out, humans have only surveyed about 5% of the planet's marine realm. That means there could still be larger corals hidden out in uncharted waters. What you're looking at here is a newly discovered creature. Again, news about this one just came out the other day. In the Monterey Canyon off California, marine biologist Bruce Robison made a discovery back in 2000. While exploring with robotic vehicles, he came across a strange gelatinous blob with a giant hood, finger-like projections, and colorful internal organs. Fast forward nearly 25 years, and Robison, along with colleague Stephen Haddock, which is a great name for someone who studies fish, they have finally solved the mystery. They've identified this bizarre creature as a brand new type of nudibranch, or sea slug. Now, unlike other sea slugs that crawl along the ocean floor though, this one floats. Looks a lot more like a jellyfish. Even more astonishing, this new nudibranch can jet backward by expelling water from its hood. The hood, as it turns out, is like a Venus flytrap, capable of expanding and contracting to trap its prey. The creature is also bioluminescent and has both male and female reproductive organs. A pretty fascinating little creature. These are recently discovered octopus species. Roughly 2 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean near Costa Rica, scientists found 4 brand new species of octopus during expeditions in June and December of last year. It all started when researchers spotted pink octopus hatchlings coming out from their eggs at a place known as El Dorado Hill. Jorge Cortez Nunez, a researcher from the University of Costa Rica, said it was unexpected to find so many species of octopus in a small area, first, and second, at 3,000 meters depth. In June, researchers using a remotely operated vehicle named Sebastian found 2 octopus nurseries around hydrothermal springs on the sea floor. They discovered that these octopuses seemed to prefer the warm waters from the vents, which helps shorten their long incubation period. The warm water gives the eggs a better chance of surviving in the cold, dark depths. One of the new species was even given an unofficial nickname, the Dorado octopus, after the spot where it was found. The species has short arms and small eyes, similar to the pearl octopus found off California. The other species had bigger eyes and longer arms. The 4th species is especially mysterious, with bumpy pale skin and a strange row of suckers on each arm. In total, about 310 deep-sea octopus specimens were collected. What you're looking at here is a recently discovered species of fish in China. You'll notice that it doesn't have eyes. They kind of look like raw chicken cutlets or something else that I can't really describe on here. And those dark patches that you see, those are its internal organs. Deep in an underground river in southern China, scientists found these blind pink fish with no eyes. They were swimming in the dark depths of a cave system in Guangxi when researchers first encountered them during surveys between 2019 and 2024. They were on the hunt for Chinese karst loaches, but quickly realized that this fish didn't match any known species. After studying it, the team confirmed that they had discovered a new species. This is the overly complicated scientific name on screen now, so I'll use the nickname Dachshund Chinese karst loach. These tiny fish are only about an inch long and have elongated bodies with no scales. They also have wide heads, narrow mouths, and whisker-like thingies on their heads, but again, no eyes. Researchers believe this species, like others in the area, lives in deep caves with underground rivers and is rarely seen by people. In November of last year, anglers off the coast of Pakistan reeled in a strange catch, a quote, torpedo-shaped predator with teeth on its tongue. At first they thought it was a regular fish, but researchers Sherkhan Panwar and Imtiaz Kashani soon realized they'd actually found something new. And after examining these fish in the lab, they discovered not one, but 2 new species. The first was Brachycentron blotchy, or the blotchy cobia. These predators are about 3 feet long, weigh around 8 pounds, and have small eyes, pointed snouts, and tiny teeth on their jaws, the roof of their mouths, and yes, even their tongues. Inside their stomachs, they found a mix of small fish, crustaceans, and cephalopods. Second species, Brachycentron marchiensis, or the macron cobia, is smaller, about 2.5 feet long, and weighs about 6 pounds. It has a short, pointed head, small teeth, and a greenish coloring with a gray band running along its side. Its stomach contained mostly digested material and some crab parts. How's this for an animal name? The night-armored catfish. Pretty cool, but does it live up to its name? Well, this is one right here. Divers in northern Brazil were exploring the Xingju River, hoping to find some Asaku preto, a thorny black fish often sold in the aquarium trade. Well, it turns out these fish hadn't been documented by science yet. After teaming up with local fishermen and digging through museum collections, scientists realized that this was a brand new species which they named Pseudacanthicus nyctos, or the night-armored catfish. These fish can grow up to 10 inches long and have completely black eyes, forked teeth, and their bodies are covered in armor-like plates and thorny spikes. Living in the murky depths of the river, they're usually found around submerged logs, sometimes as deep as 65 feet. As you could probably tell, they're carnivores, feeding on small aquatic animals. They're also very territorial. The males can get very aggressive, especially when sharing space with other males. Off the coast of Belize, anglers unknowingly caught a new species of shark between 2016 and 2019. First they thought they'd just landed another hammerhead, but something about the shark's unique shovel-shaped heads made scientists take a closer look. And after analyzing the shark's body shape, skeleton, and DNA, researchers realized these were part of a completely new species, the shovelbill shark. These small sharks, measuring up to 3 feet 4 inches long, have these very unique, flat, shovel-looking heads. They're found in coastal waters, estuaries, coral reefs, and seagrass beds from Belize all the way to Brazil. They're often caught by anglers, and experts warn that they may already be highly threatened. As co-author of the study, Demian Chapman said, "It is tragic that we have only just recognized that this species exists, and we are already running against the clock to prevent its extinction." Yeah, that is very sad, especially because these sharks are kind of cute, you know? Off the coast of Saudi Arabia, researchers exploring coral reefs discovered this tiny, really upset-looking fish, and honestly, I think if I looked like this, I would also be in a pretty bad mood all the time. While diving in the Red Sea, they released clove oil into an underwater cave to sedate the fish inside, and a small dark red goby floated to the surface. At first, they weren't sure what species it was, and after several sightings and a few more catches, they figured out why. This was not a species they'd ever seen before. This little fish, only about half an inch long, had a severely curved mouth that gave it this sort of grumpy look. Researchers named it the grumpy dwarf goby because of this permanently unhappy looking facial expression. The fish is incredibly rare, with only 10 specimens found during extensive collections along the Saudi Arabian coast, said the researchers. They live in small caves, rocky overhangs, or crevices about 32 to 100 feet below the surface. Again, in the caves of southern China, researchers discovered a fish which they'd named Liu's cave loach, a new species swimming through heavily polluted water. The creatures caught the attention of scientists visiting the area in 2023. Spelled out for you here is their scientific name, but again, they're also called Liu's cave loach for short. They can grow up to 2.5 inches long. They have elongated bodies covered in tiny scales with bright yellow fins. Their snouts are lined with whiskers, almost like a catfish, and their eyes have a yellowish hue. They live in underground rivers and cave pools, but don't show the usual traits of cave-dwelling species. They were also found breeding in a cave pond, despite the water being heavily polluted from nearby sugar factories and duck farms. So far, Liu's cave loaches have only been found in the caves of Yifeng District, Guangxi, a province in southern China near the Vietnam border. Deep beneath the surface of the ocean, researchers have discovered 3 brand new species of sea stars living in some of the most remote and bizarre environments on Earth. The sea stars were found thousands of feet below the surface at methane seeps in underwater valleys using remote-controlled vehicles during surveys between 2003 and 2018. One of the new species showing up on screen in text right now because I don't have a week to learn how to pronounce that. Anyway, it was discovered off the coast of Costa Rica about 3,200 feet down. With flower-like patterns, small plates on its back, these creatures move along the seafloor using tube feet that extend down each arm. Another species, Hymonostella davidalani, also found in Costa Rica, looks similar but has thorny, elongated spines along the edge of its body. The third species, Cayman Ostella lorisae, has short spines covered in thick skin, and interestingly, all mature specimens looked identical. These deep sea stars seem to live around stuff that sinks to the bottom of the ocean, like like sunken wood, which gives them shelter and food. And researchers still aren't sure if the sea stars eat only the wood or if they have other food sources down there. One of the wildest tales in naval history is the encounter the USS Stein had back in 1978. The ship was cruising in an undisclosed location when suddenly its sonar equipment went down. The crew was startled by the noise feedback, but no one could see what was going on. When they returned to dry dock to figure out what had happened, they found that the sonar dome, located right at the bow of the ship, had been shredded. We're talking about large gashes, some 4 feet long, or about 1.2 meters, that covered about 8% of the dome's surface, and if that wasn't crazy enough, they found these massive teeth or claws embedded in the slash marks. Navy Marine biologist Forrest G. Wood took a look at the evidence and concluded that these were arm hooks from a squid. But here's the thing, the claws were way bigger than any squid parts anyone had ever seen before. C. Scott Johnson, a Navy biophysicist, went a step further and suggested that they were likely dealing with a quote extremely large species still unknown to science. So what was it? A giant squid? Some other monstrous deep sea creature? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. The HMS Daedalus has a fascinating story, especially when it comes to the legendary sea serpent sighting back in 1848. Launched as a warship in 1826, it was during one of its voyages to St. Helena that something absolutely wild happened. On August 6th of 1848, Captain McQuay and his crew spotted an enormous creature while navigating between the Cape of Good Hope and St. Helena. They described it as a giant serpent with about 4 feet of its head visible above the water. The captain estimated the entire length to be around 60 feet and said it was dark brown in color with a yellowish white throat. The creature was swimming fast, between 19 and 24 kilometers per hour, and the captain claimed that the creature, quote, passed rapidly, but so close under our lee quarter that, had it been a man of my acquaintance, I should have easily have recognized his features with the naked eye. He wasn't the only one who saw it either. 7 crew members reported seeing the creature for about 20 minutes. One officer also said that it looked more like a lizard than a serpent. Speaking of the sea serpent reportedly seen by the Daedalus, another sea monster was seen that very same year, this time by an American ship. The story of the sighting was detailed in a letter to a Glasgow newspaper, written by James Henderson, captain of the Mary Ann of Glasgow. When clearing out of the port of Lisbon, upon the 30th of September last, we saw the American brig Daphne of Boston. She signals for us to heave to and lay to while the mate boarded us, and handed a packet of letters to be dispatched per first steamer for Boston on our arrival in England. The mate told me that upon the 20th of September, a most extraordinary animal had been seen. It had the appearance of a huge serpent, or snake, with a dragon's head. Immediately upon its being seen, one of the deck guns was brought to bear, which, having been charged with nails and whatever other pieces of iron could be got at the moment, was discharged at the animal. Then, only distant about 40 yards from the ship, it immediately reared its head in the air and plunged violently with its body, showing that the charge had taken effect. It was seen foaming and lashing the water at fearful rate. Upon the brig nearing, however, it disappeared, and though evidently wounded, made rapidly off at the rate of 15 or 16 knots an hour, as was judged from its appearing several times upon the surface. The Daphne pursued for some time, but the night coming on, the master was obliged to put about and continue his voyage. From the description given by the mate, the brute must have been nearly 100 feet long. Captain Henderson went on to write that the creature matched the description of the one seen by Captain McQuay and his crew on the Daedalus. The USS Indianapolis incident is one of the most harrowing shark attack stories in history. This US Navy cruiser was on a mission in 1945 delivering enriched uranium for the atomic bomb Little Boy. After successfully completing that mission, the ship set sail for the Philippines with a crew of 1,195. But just after midnight, a Japanese sub torpedoed the ship. In a matter of minutes, the Indianapolis sank, and 300 sailors went down with her. For the survivors, though, things would only get worse. Around 900 men now found themselves adrift in the vast Pacific with no land in sight. As the wreckage floated and chaos unfolded, the sounds of explosions and and splashes attracted hundreds of hungry oceanic white-tipped sharks. Sharks like this here. Just imagine a swarm of these things mauling you as you're stranded out in the middle of nowhere, hanging onto rubble for dear life. The sharks, being drawn by the scent of BLOOD and thrashing bodies, began circling the survivors, and over the next 3.5 days, the sailors would be fighting off these relentless attacks from the sharks, using whatever they could grab, life vests, oars, anything to defend themselves. And not only that, but they had dehydration and the fear of drowning to worry about. Some sailors ended up taking their own lives rather than facing the absolute hell that they were in. When rescue finally arrived, only 316 men were left alive out of 900. This has to be the most horrific shark attack story I've ever heard. On April 30th of 1918, Captain Gunther Kretsch and his crew were captured by a British warship. When interrogated, Kretsch would tell the Brits one of the wildest tales in naval history. He told them that his submarine had been attacked by a monstrous sea creature. According to him, the beast had small, deep-set eyes, was covered in horns, and had a mouth full of sharp teeth. He claimed it climbed aboard their U-boat, causing it to take on water. They had no idea what to make of Kretsch's story, but it soon came out that things didn't exactly go the way the Germans said they did. Another German crew member revealed that Kretsch had been unusually cold, insisting on having a heater installed in the office's compartment. This installation required running cabling from the sub through the main hatch, which ended up compromising its seal. When the British ship was spotted, the crew hurriedly shut the hatch and attempted to dive, but because of the faulty hatch, water started rushing into the submarine. So they had to surface, and then the crew had no choice but to surrender. Kretsch was so embarrassed about his mistake that he made up this story about a sea monster just so the British wouldn't see how incompetent he'd been. It's a pretty funny story. During the Cold War, the US Navy faced a strange problem that no one expected. Damage to its Ohio-class submarines, and it turned out that this damage was actually being caused by very little sharks called cookie-cutter sharks. These submarines were some of the largest ever built, after all. They were state-of-the-art, powerful ships, but submarine crews started reporting issues like leaking oil lines, missing chunks from electrical cables, and damaged sonar domes. At first, the Navy suspected the Soviets had something to do with it. Perhaps they'd built some highly advanced weapon that they just weren't picking up, but it turned out that these small sharks were just taking bites out of the subs. Cookie-cutter sharks, also known as cigar sharks, only grow about 16 to 20 inches long. Their feeding method is what gives them their name. They bite circular holes into their prey, leaving behind wounds that look like they were left by a big cookie cutter. Take a look at this dolphin here with a big chunk taken out of it. What you're looking at here was caused by a cookie cutter shark. It looks horrific. These sharks aren't picky eaters, obviously. I mean, they go after all kinds of marine life and even non-edible material, especially any exposed soft areas. When Navy officials realized that these tiny predators were behind the mysterious damage to the submarines, they began installing fiberglass domes around the most vulnerable parts of the subs. How about some creepy sounds at sea? This next story comes from Reddit user Vitamin, who writes, I was US Navy. Pretty sure we heard siren calls somewhere northwest of the Marshall Islands. Was on the smoke deck on 3 separate occasions at night, and anyone who was out there heard what sounded like a distant screech, echoing over the waves. I remember it well because it caused several man overboard scares where we'd all have to go muster to make sure those sounds weren't any of ours. Never actually saw anything, so I rationalized that it could have been some kind of animal or seabird, but it sounded human. But not entirely human. We joked for weeks after we left the region that Ariel, the Little Mermaid, was gonna kill us. This was 2013, but I still remember that sound like it was yesterday. The kind of sound that hits your core like freezing wind does. Not something I'd want to hear again. And then a commenter asked him if it sounded like a woman or a man's screech, and Vitamin replied saying that it was hard to describe, but sounded almost androgynous, a mix of feminine and masculine in the sound, which was also distorted by the eerie echo. During the Vietnam War, a terrifying incident took place involving the USS Maddox. In 1964, tensions were high, and one night, the Maddox found itself in a heated confrontation with North Vietnamese torpedo boats. After firing 380 shells and dropping several depth charges, the crew expected to see enemy vessels, but to their confusion, air support reported no sign of any boats. The sonar engineer who was on the Maddox that night told the story to a marine biologist named Todd Newberry in 1966, and he described how radar picked up objects that looked like torpedoes, but they behaved strangely, almost as if they were alive. Newberry had a wild theory. These mysterious radar blips could have actually been pyrosomes. Pyrosomes are marine organisms made up of thousands of tiny individuals that come together to create this large, translucent form. They can grow up to 60 feet long or 18 meters and are bioluminescent, which would explain the reports of bright lights seen that night, which were mistaken for enemy craft. Back in 1976, a torpedo recovery boat was doing some oceanographic research when it snagged something big while dragging a cargo parachute. The crew had no clue what they'd caught, but whatever it was, it put up one heck of a fight. The ship was straining against this powerful creature, but then suddenly everything stopped. The beast had suffocated, accidentally having swallowed part of the chute. The crew pulled the thing aboard, and they couldn't believe their eyes. They had just caught what would later be named a megamouth shark. Yes, later named. This was a creature that had never been seen before this day, and they'd caught it entirely by accident. And it wasn't small either. This monster was about 15 feet long and weighed around 750 pounds. The megamouth shark is rarely ever seen. Since the day it was discovered by this crew back in 1976, it's only been spotted about 100 other times. In 1955, something incredible happened aboard the USS Hale. Commander Vining A. Sherman was called to the bridge to check out something unusual caught on the ship's ramming stem. What he saw was a, quote, monster of gigantic size. He could hardly believe his eyes. The creature had been split in two, with an estimated 40 feet of its body dragging along the port side and another 12 feet hanging off the starboard side. Sherman had seen plenty of sharks, but never one that was over 50 feet long. As they freed the ship from the creature, Sherman took a closer look. He couldn't shake the feeling that this thing was unlike any shark he had ever encountered. He thought it was so large that he could easily sit in its mouth. When they returned to port, Sherman did some research, and he eventually found that the mysterious creature was a whale shark. At that time, sightings of whale sharks were incredibly rare. He spoke to many sailors and fishermen who had heard legends about these massive creatures, but had never actually seen one themselves. And yeah, the thing must have looked like a monster. Take a look at this footage here of one being hauled out of the water.
Number 10. Giant oarfish. An oarfish really looks like a fish-snake hybrid, as it's a huge, greatly elonged fish. The giant oarfish is the longest bony fish alive, growing up to 36 feet in length. It is found in areas spanning from temperate ocean zones to tropical ones. But unfortunately, we know little about the oarfish because it lives deep underwater and it's rarely seen. However, we know it neither feeds on humans nor fishes, but on small marine creatures like crustaceans and krill. It was officially discovered in 1772, and in September 1996, the United States Navy SEALs found a giant oarfish that washed up on the shore near San Diego, California, and it was 23 feet long. The giant oarfish is by far the largest member of its fish family, at a published total length of 26 feet, with unconfirmed reports of 36 feet and 56 feet specimens and 600 pounds in weight. Now, even though those aren't confirmed, the 20-foot long one still scares me immensely. Number 9. Giant squid. So the Kraken is a legendary sea monster of enormous size and is said to appear off the coast of Norway, but what if I told you it was real? A giant squid was found on a shore in Denmark in 1853. The giant squid is as elusive as the legend it inspired, as it lives so deep underwater that we have limited information about it. However, we know it has the largest eyes of all living creatures, grows up to 60 feet, and is frequently hunted by sperm whales for food. The weaker giant squid generally flees when confronted by a whale, However, it sometimes fights back when cornered, and it's not unusual to find sperm whales with scars left from their battles with giant squids. It wasn't until the turn of this century in 2001 that humans saw the giant squid for the first time, and only a few years after that it was finally photographed, making it one of the most elusive on the planet. The giant squid has long been known to exist, but capturing it on film has taken scientists extensive time and voyages to the deepest parts of the ocean where life is difficult to sustain. Number 8. Ribbon worm. Most ribbon worms are very slim, usually only a few millimeters wide, although a few have relatively short but wide bodies. Many have a pattern of yellow, orange, red, and green coloration, and they move slowly using their external cilia to glide on surfaces on a trail of slime, while larger species use muscular waves to crawl. Most of these worms burrow in sediments, lurk in crevices between shells, stones, or the holdfasts of algae or sessile animals. Others build semi-permanent burrows lined with mucus or produce cellophane-like tubes. Mainly in the tropics and subtropics, about 12 species appear in freshwater, and about a dozen species live on the land in cool, damp places, for example under rotting logs. Now these just sound disgusting to me, and I never want to get close to one. Number 7. Hagfish. With a name like that, I think you can expect this thing to be quite ugly. And it is. It actually makes me incredibly uncomfortable. I mean, just look at it. Ew, like how is that even real? Now, hagfish are eel-shaped, slime-producing marine fish, and they are the only known living animals that have a skull but no vertebral column, although hagfish do have rudimentary vertebrae. Hagfish are jawless, and living hagfish remain similar to hagfish from around 30 million years ago. There are estimated to be 76 species of hagfish, and some live as deep as 5,500 feet below the water's surface. They're also known as slime eels because of the goop their bodies produce to ward off predators. These animals can grow to be between 16 and 40 inches long, and some live as deep as 5,600 feet below the water's surface, and as long as they stay away from me though, that's all that matters. Number 6. Barrel eye. The barrel eye, also known as a spookfish, has extremely light-sensitive eyes on top of its fluid-filled head. The barrel eye was first described in 1939, but remained a mystery to scientists until 2009, when they discovered that its large tubular eyes could actually rotate inside its head. This rotational ability allows them to look upward for potential prey or face forward to see what it is eating. Since barrel eyes live at such depths where there is hardly any light, their tubular eyes help them see whatever faint amounts of light drift down to them. They also have two spots above their mouths which are called nars, similar to human nostrils. Now I understand why they're called spookfish though, because they do look extremely spooky. Number 5. The slender snipe eel. The slender snipe eel, one of the most compact deep-sea critters, can grow to a minimum length of 4 feet, but weighs no more than 6 or 7 ounces. It has a bird-like beak with curving tips covered with tiny hooked teeth, which they use to sweep through the water to catch shrimp and other crustaceans. It has a lifespan of 10 years and has more vertebrae in its backbone than any other animal, which is around 750. However, its anus has moved forward during its evolution, and it's now located on the throat, so that's nice. Their reproduction is done by spawning, which is when a female lays eggs and the males lay their sperm into the water at the same time. Now, the slender snipe eel only spawns once in their lifetime, as they just die after spawning. Now, it's difficult for scientists to research these organisms because of the extreme environment they inhabit, but hopefully one day we'll get more information on that. Number 4. Goblin shark. The goblin shark is a rare species of deep-sea shark. Sometimes called a living fossil, they are part of a lineage of sharks that are some 125 million years old. The pink-skinned animal has a distinctive profile with an elongated flat snout and highly protrusible jaws containing prominent nail-like teeth. It is usually between 10 and 13 feet long when mature, though it can grow considerably larger because there was once one captured in 2000 that is thought to have been measured 20 feet. With 50 teeth in their mouths, those gruesome creatures command attention, and honestly not really for the right reasons. Interestingly, female goblin sharks are larger in adulthood than the male species. Now, despite their size, some researchers believe that these sharks could also dive the depths up to 4,270 feet for short periods of time. Number 3. Osdax. Osdax is Latin for bone eater, and these animals are also known as zombie worms. The name alludes to how these worms bore into the bones of whale carcasses to to reach enclosed lipids on which they rely for substance. With no mouth, anus, or gut, the 4-centimeter long worms survive by secreting an acid that breaks up the whale bone. Now, why do these even exist? I don't know. They utilize specialized root tissues for bone boring, and it is possible that multiple species of Osdax reside in the same bone. Osdax worms are also known to feed on the collagen itself by making holes in the whale's skeletal structure. These holes can also serve as a form of protection from nearby predators. Scientists from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, using the submarine ROV Tiburn, first discovered the species in Monterey Bay, California in February 2002. The worms were found living on the bones of a decaying gray whale in the Monterey Canyon at a depth of 9,491 feet. Number 2. Deep sea dragonfish. Deep sea dragonfish are quite small, usually around 15 centimeters up to 26 centimeters. These fish are apex predators and have enormous jaws filled with fang-like teeth. In addition, they are also able to hinge their upper jaw system, which leads to them opening the jaw to more than 100 degrees, which is scary. This ability allows them to consume extremely large prey, often 50% greater than their standard length. The dragonfish can be found in all oceans, and they also exist at a wide range of depths between the surface and thousands of meters down, between 3,300 and 9,800 feet. It is one of the many species of deep sea fish that can produce their own light through a chemical process known as bioluminescence. They cannot luminesce longer than 30 minutes without adrenaline, but in the presence of adrenaline, it can produce light for many hours. They produce blue-green light, the wavelengths of which can travel the farthest in the ocean. The deep sea dragonfish waves its barbel back and forth and produces flashing lights on and off to attract prey and potential mates. Many of the species they prey upon also produce light themselves, which is why they have evolved to have black stomach walls to keep the light concealed while digesting their meal in order to stay hidden from predators. And coming in at number 1 is immortal jellyfish. The immortal jellyfish is a species of small biological immortal jellyfish found worldwide in tropic waters. Given the nickname immortal jellyfish for its ability to revert back to a polyp stage when it is starving or in danger and basically escaping death, researchers believe this jellyfish may hold the cure to cancer. Under normal conditions, its life cycle is divided into 4 parts. The union of the male and female gametes produces larva or planuna. It then attaches to the seabed as a polyp similar to an anemone. The polyp then releases ephora or young jellyfish in the phase prior to sexual maturity. They become jellyfish, reproduce sexually, and start over. But if they are stressed by an environmental threat, the jellyfish revert. After reproducing, they return to the previous phases, becoming polyps on the ocean floor again. As far as scientists know, jellyfish can repeat the process indefinitely. Thus, they are said to be biologically immortal. They can be eaten by a predator or fall into the hands of a swimmer, but they do not die of old age, which is pretty cool, but it's crazy that they can do this.